Hello and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior radio show and podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California to around the world. I'm your host Mo, and today on the show we have Frater X. Frater X is an expert on Freemasonic, mysticism, esoteric, occult orders, and is a member of 9 different orders connected to the Freemasons. Those would be the Knights Templar, Knight Masons, Order of the Sword of Bunker Hill, Masonic Rosicrucians, and the Ancient Order of the Druids. Frater X is one of the best guys out there as far as knowledge is concerned on Freemasonry, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show today. How you doing today, Frater X?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to a good conversation.
Definitely. It's been some time. I tried to get you on the show for a little while. I know you're a busy guy, and you've been on several of the other great podcasts that everybody listens to as well. What have you been up to recently?
Well, things have been really crazy recently. I relocated my entire family. My wife and I, we have 4 children, and we moved from the East Coast of America to the Midwest, a couple thousand miles inland. So it's basically the whole upheaval of that, and then reestablishing a household and everything that goes into that. So it has been a little bit hectic, and meanwhile I've been trying to, keep commitments to other people that have asked me to come on to interview me about my research, and I'm also still working on the book, The Secret War Inside Freemasonry, which is to be released on the Sync Book Press at thesyncbook.com, which is taking up a lot of the focus right now. But meanwhile, just trying to live life and roll with the punches of what's going on in our society at large, and just trying to pay attention to the trends that are coming, and being aware of how to respond to this postmodern world we're living in, right?
Yeah, definitely. And talking about family, it's interesting. You don't hear much about that. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, your family, before we get into, all this great stuff you're doing right now?
Sure. Well, I was raised in the northeast of America in New England, and lived, in working class family. Pretty well off, though, in the area I grew up in, because it was a nice little New England resort, town right on the water. So even if you were working class or working poor, or however you want to put it, you still had it was a pretty cozy lifestyle, and in many ways it's a bubble existence, so I always had a hard time kind of fitting in with everybody, with the basic patterns of society and reality that America was presenting. I was born in 1970, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s, Reaganomics, the Cold War, all that stuff, and saw the shift from that to our what we could call like the postmodern era of America, for the sake of this conversation. But I always felt kind of like I was in the role of the outsider, by circumstance or by choice. But one way or the other, I felt like I was going against the trend in many ways. And I have done a lot of research into the outsider phenomenon in society, the prime mover or the inoculant of society. You look at guys like Colin Wilson, who's a famous writer of much paranormal and occult stuff, but he also wrote, one of his first books was called The Outsider, which was a study of this phenomenon, as well as Nietzsche talks about it a lot too. The Ubermensch in many ways is an outsider. He's a minority. He's an inoculant for the rest of society, and oftentimes the effects of it are seen long after that person is gone. But the things that they were saying and doing, and people that I've found who have gravitated towards this whole truther movement, which is what we'll call that for the sake of this conversation. The people that listen to your show, the people that listen to my show, and shows like this are people, I think, in general, who feel a sense of outcast or outsider from the norm, from the mainstream meme. They definitely are seeing that everything we've been taught is wrong, and not what we thought it was, and seeing behind the curtain, as it were. But so sticking to the idea of where I came from, I just was a person who didn't fit into the square peg round hole mentality, and so it was easy for me to set out into the wilderness, as it were, wander away from that idyllic little bubble lifestyle and wander out into America at large with the romantic notion of connecting with some sort of, spirit of the times or whatever, the zeitgeist of America. And in the end, what I found was dismaying. There was a lot of, I often say I found a lot of pollution and despair, in postmodern industrial America. This idea of the production base of America shifting around the time of my, late adolescence and early adulthood. It was very clear if you traveled across America in the 80s and 90s, you saw this wasteland forming in these towns that used to have, some sort of production identity, the production base of America, as it were, and just
the suburbia.
Yeah, exactly, and just the sprawl and how the after effect, the ripple effect of a lot of those companies shutting down, people being, having their trades removed, and then everything being shipped overseas, and the shift generally in the consensus of our societies, and I was a person who was in many ways felt as if I was ahead of the trend. Again, I would relate that to feeling outcasted or feeling like an outsider, being able to not be susceptible to the majority thinking, the just not being susceptible to the pressure of going along with things, because you don't want to lose your status. Well, if you don't have status, you're not afraid of losing it. And so it was easy to kind of see through, to see that the emperor wasn't wearing clothes, so to speak. And about 20...
What were you attributing it to, this change in these trends? Did you attribute it to the government or some secret power? What did you think back then before you did now?
Well, keeping it on myself, to speak for myself, I sensed in myself a lack of the sacred, a lack of connection with the greater meaning of life, so to speak. That the whole restlessness of youth. If you look at the cultural trends in pop culture America, the beatnik generation, for example, sort of like the first manifestation of this postmodern dystopian kind of uneasiness. All this energy hopped up on speed and caffeine and nowhere to go with it, and this sense of like this American exceptionalism gone wild, gone rogue, as it were, and then the after effect of that. The destruction of relationships, the destruction of the environment, and the destruction of the cohesiveness of society. Well, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, far long after that whole beat generation, but the decades between the two, we saw the continuation of this re-expression of an alienation. I often said that I was orphaned by economics because my family had to work all the time, a latchkey kid, and coming home to an empty house, coming home to the television, coming home to that, sort of vapid, empty reality of America where all we do is work and buy stuff, that consumerism. And right away I sensed there was something wrong with this. But I couldn't really put my finger on it because I was young and I was unexperienced and uneducated. But I knew deep down in my marrow and in my intuition, I knew there was something inherently wrong with the way things were, but I couldn't really put my finger on it. So traveling away from all that is known, away from the warm campfires of humanity, so to speak, you get perspective, and you begin, as experiences happen, you begin to be able to put those perspectives in line with wisdom that's gained through understanding. And I slowly formulated, this big picture reality that it became what is now my main thesis, the idea of the secret war on human consciousness. And so, having recently written a paper, an article that was put in the fall issue number 57, I think, of Paranoia Magazine, which can be found at paranoiamagazine.com. The article was called "The Secret War on Human Consciousness," which also was the basis of my talk last April at the Free Your Mind conference, the second one in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This overarching theme is the idea that there is, in fact, a secret war on human consciousness, an information war of perception, and it's being waged by what we could call the global power elite, against all other life on Earth, against the awakening of humanity to a sense of higher consciousness, that we might instead remain asleep to the control and restraints upon us. And so for me, as a adolescent, it was a voyage of discovery, learning about the conditions of what I could call a corpo-slaveocracy that I think we live in, and not democracy, but a corporate slaveocracy in which we're all pretty much, indentured or in fealty to one corporation or another. And then the giant overarching corporation, which is, of course, the United States government.
What's their part in this? You see them as a huge military power in the world, and they've, since 1776, we've had, X amount of wars, and it seems that it's been nonstop. Do you see they're the military force or the police force for this secret power that's operating, such as NSA, and you hear that America's spying on all these foreign countries, and I know you've talked about that lately. Care to comment on that?
Well, yeah, I think that it's really clear. Again, if you check out the article I wrote, The Secret War on Human Consciousness, I pretty much map out a revisionist history of American military history, and you see a series of false flag events, one after another, from the beginning of the onset of what we could call the early days of the military-industrial complex, which I believe really manifested in in and around the Civil War, and then especially after the Civil War with the Reconstruction. And, I think that we see that rise of military-industrial dynamic in our culture that goes concurrent from that time period right up to the present day. And we see the effect of it over and over. The over-militarization of our police, law enforcement in America it's sickening. I mean, you hear in the papers every day now, there's kids getting gunned down in the streets by police officers. Again, I grew up in the 70s. We used to call cops pigs, and there was a reason for that, because it was the wake of the 60s civil rights movement where police rioted and beat people in the streets with billy clubs and stuff, and it was on TV every night, and everybody was like really conscious of this oppressive police brutality. But nowadays we've been conditioned over and over again with like NYPD Blue and NCIS and all these cop shows that have there's one coming out every day, a new cop show is spinning out of TV that's just like conditioning everyone to just accept law enforcement, accept brutality. I was talking about this with my wife today, how, there's not even any commentary anymore from the police officials. Like, you hear about the police brutality, the gunning down of women and children without, where's all the tasers? Where's the shooting in the leg to just stop a person? No, they're gunning them down dead in the streets, and they're not even saying they're sorry. I mean, these guys, the police officers are getting, unpaid suspensions and things of this nature. So why are they doing that without commentary? It's to condition us to accept it, to accept inhumane treatment against each other, and accept, the inhumane treatment of our environment, because our environment is a living thing as far as I'm concerned, and we treat it inhumanely every day. We're coerced into doing it in our society. But it all goes back to the industrialization of our society. If you look back at Western culture, go back, you don't even have to go back just a couple hundred years. But if you really want to go back, the time of the Crusades, at the end of the Crusades, and many of these military orders at the end of the Crusades had to find meaning and context for their existence. One of them was the Teutonic Knights of Germany. They basically went back to Germany and started their own new Sparta in the area that became known as Prussia. It was a land in Germany that had their own native population of villagers or whatever lived there, and the Teutonic Knights came in, wiped out the population, transplanted their own people, and started Prussia, and just basically became civil servants in that culture. The Knight or Order of Teutonic Knights became like the civil servants of the government of Prussia, and they created a fully mobilized and militarized society, not unlike Sparta, where everyone served the military machine. And of course, we know, if we look in histories like John Taylor Gatto's Underground History of American Education, Dumbing Us Down, and several other books that are out there on the same topics, we find that that's exactly what America did in the early 1800s. They transported or they transplanted or grafted an Americanized version of the Prussian schooling system. Gatto makes a point of saying it really wasn't the Prussian system, because Horace Mann didn't really even get exposed to the Prussian system when he went to Germany. He went there like in the summertime where there was nobody there except teachers, and they just told him what they did, and he kind of was impressed and took back this notion to America. They started the New England School, which started compulsion schooling in America. Why was this so important? Well, it was important because they recognized what Prussia recognized, that they needed to dumb down the population and educate people to devalue their real lives, their real lifestyles, and only to value their efforts for the state and for profit, for consumer profit and efforts for the state. Lay down their lives for the state. The Prussian schooling system and then the American compulsion schooling system basically created and does create good little industrial workers and soldiers. And that's, that was the point.
Yeah, and if you look at this history that you speak of back to the Teutonic Knights, and of course you mentioned Sparta, this goes back thousands of years. We all come from a violent history, and I don't think a lot of people realize this from the beginning formations of our country to thousands of years back. So the idea of militaries running governments or taking over governments or being the Pope, such as the first Pontifex Maximus, which would be Augustus Caesar, who was a high priest and also a warrior, is nothing new. So it's just something to me that seems it's logical that this is going to happen and it's going to continue to happen in the future, and there's nothing that's really going to stop it unless they decide to put an end to it. But now it seems that they have it sewn up, the game. Do you agree that whoever's in charge, the secret power, has this whole world sewn up? If they want to at any time, they could unleash the Kraken?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it does certainly seem that way. I believe that they have the might, it seems, with all the modern technology and, their law enforcement science that they've, perfected, and crowd control and all this stuff, and the means of terrorizing populations and of shock and awe and all the methods that our military might has for keeping us all terrified and in our place. Well, that is all true, but luckily, there's two key things that we can always keep in mind as a way of hope. Two things. Humanity is always prone to two things. Number one, it's prone to error. Number two, it's prone to novelty. And these two things, I think, are our keys to our survival as a species, because in the end, I believe that enough people will just shrug off this nonsense and walk away. And hopefully, and that's what the Greeks, the Gnostics of the early, couple thousand years ago when they laid down those books in the Nag Hammadi libraries, they predicted that we would, at the last hour, in the 11th hour end game, we would all, or enough of humanity would shrug off this archonic nonsense and just take off and say, forget it, we're not playing this game anymore. And that is my hope, because you're right, it does seem like we have so much in the way of opposition keeping us. We struggle every day just to maintain some sort of dignity and autonomy in our regular reality. It's unbelievable the level that they will stoop to keep us all locked into this, lockstep, sensory materialism, this narrow bandwidth of reality where we're all just focusing on profit and money and exploiting each other for profit and money, and it's just, it's sickening at times. But luckily there's another thing that we can always keep in mind, and it's something they asked Terence McKenna once, and he was asked after he broke down the basic, just like we're talking about right now, and at the end of his little talk in Eastland Institute back in the 80s, they asked him, well, what do we do, man? Okay, if you're right, there's all this bad stuff going on, what do we do? What's the answer? What's the solution? He didn't even think about it. He looked right at the person and he said, art. Art is the solution. Artistic expression, non-compliance through artistic expression. As far as I'm concerned, that's the best answer I could come up with as well.
It seems like they're letting us do that, from us communicating right now openly, where this couldn't happen in the past, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, talking about these kind of things, maybe more of, 100, 200 years ago. And then prior to that, why are they allowing the information and knowledge out at the same time? Of course, they're seem to be getting harder with the hammer and the noose on people and the frogs in the pot. They're turning up the heat. But at the same time, again, we're allowed to seek this knowledge and to gain this light. And, we're still in this new world order system where we're being monitored, but we also can gain as much knowledge as we want and avoid as much as these traps as well. What are your thoughts on that? Are they going to continue to allow this to happen, or are they eventually going to shut it down?
Well, I think there's two things to consider. Number one, they have all kinds of methods of measurement of obedience to recognize whether it's working or not, whether the scam that they're doing is, whether they're pulling it off. You know what I mean? Because they IRS tax collection, that's one measurement. The percentage of people who actually willingly pay their taxes. It shows them whether or not they're winning. You know, the people that don't, in fact, rise up and go down to the local town hall and burn the place down. You know what I mean? Like, it shows that they're winning in their minds, you know, as far as I think that's one aspect to it. The other aspect to it is I think it's a great sorter. You know, by putting the information out there, it kind of brings out those of us who will resonate with it and say, yeah, that's right on, man, that's true. And then they can pay attention and focus on us and surveil us, you know, keep an eye on us, as it were. And if those of us who are so moved with passion, fervency, and zeal to get out there and actually, you know, get in the streets and act, you know, try to be active and try to do something, well, that's drawing them out to make them aware to the powers that be. I mean, in many ways, I think that's probably a method. And then there's just the arrogance of the idea that, you know, that they could just put that out there and not worry about the effect because they feel like they're in, you know, so far in control. Yeah, such control. These are just speculations, you know, because I don't know for sure. Yeah. But I often think the same thing. Well, how come they would put that out there? And it's like the knee-jerk response in my mind is like, well, they put it out there to try to give you the impression that you're free. You know, and there's so much information. They're counting on the fact that most people are just overwhelmed. I mean, I can make statements, I can make caveats and bold statements right here on this show all day long. Unless people actually go and research you know, what I'm saying, they're either going to accept or deny what I say. If they accept what I say and I'm incorrect, they've just accepted fallacy and they're going with it. You know, and it's because most people don't have the time to research everything that's being said. Now, the paper I just wrote for Paranoia Magazine, I had, you know, something like 26 footnoted citations. You know, every caveat, every statement that I made, I tried to have, you know, some sort of a source material for the people who are reading the article to actually go and hunt it down, because I think it's important for people to have that opportunity, if they do, to you know, to try to verify facts. But the point I was making is that I think that the powers that shouldn't be out there, they count on people not looking stuff up and not having time and just going with, you say a thing enough, right? You know, you say a thing enough. What was it, Hitler that said that? You tell a lie enough times with enough, you know, with enough conviction, and people will believe it. You know, eventually, the bigger the lie, the more they'll believe it. You know, and I like what Mark Twain said, though. He said it's easier to fool people than to convince them that they're being fooled.
What's interesting, though, is that the majority of the population, I believe, like the powers that be, that's pretty sewn up as far as they're going along with this plan and they're doing what they're told, and whatever they learn in school or whatever they learn on TV or the media's that's telling them, they believe. So it seems like the game is sewn up. They have the surveillance going on. What's going to happen next? What do you see happening in the future? Do you see this just continuing and the noose being tighter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's getting pushed to ahead, it seems, as if we're being brought to some sort of, you know, it seems like inevitably there's, like, I'm really interested in all this development, this resurgence of rhetoric about secrecy all of a sudden, like in the 70s, back in the 70s when the MK Ultra stuff all came out, and they were like, oh, you know, we used to do that, but we're cool now, we're all better. we're not testing our weird drugs on people anymore, we swear, you know. And it's like, who was in charge of the CIA back then? Oh yeah, George Herbert Walker Bush was, you know. And it's just interesting now that we've entered this new phase of rhetoric from the president about how, you know, we're really going to have oversight now about all this secrecy and stuff. And, you know, it's important, I think, to really pay attention for the average people, especially people who are drawn to the truther causes and truther, you know, people who are seeking truth with regards to the subject matter that you discuss and I discuss and other people like us, researchers and media producers out there, are discussing and looking at. Because government secrecy is the secrecy that's bad. You know, I mean, oftentimes, you know, in general, there's this sense of knee-jerk aversion to all things secret, and it's understandable. The general consensus out there among the uninitiated and initiated alike is to fear and suspect secrecy in the Western esoteric systems, which, you know, would be like the Freemasonic lodges or magical orders or any practice of spiritual development involving any kind of secrecy. And, you know, it's completely understandable. Yet we're conditioned to accept government closed-door secrecy as par for the course. Yeah, you know, there's no... Well, go ahead.
No, if you look at the founders of the country, you know, you look at George Washington and many of the signers of the Constitution, so forth, were Freemasons. Are these people still in control and working in conjunction? Are they now not in control? Or what's your thoughts on that? And does that play anything into the secret war in Freemasonry?
Well, yeah, that's it's a huge can of worms to open there. The bottom line is that, and this is something I feel like I've been tasked to educate people about, is that Freemasonry is a clearinghouse. It's the ground level. It's the door level, the street level. People who come into the Freemasonic Lodge in every little town in America, the Blue Lodge they call it, where they have the AF and AM or FAM on the building, with the square and compasses. That's a Blue Lodge. And people coming in there anybody can join that. Anyone listening, if you want to join a Blue Lodge, you can walk down to a local Blue Lodge and join that lodge. But you're just going to become a Master Mason in that lodge, and you're going to learn the traditions that they have to offer from the people who are there. But it doesn't, you're not enlisting to become part of the global power elite now. That's not how it works. But what happens is once you become a Master Mason, a member of the Blue Lodge, and that's a third-degree Mason, you are now eligible for membership in up to 800 other appendant bodies that predicate their membership on a person being a Master Mason, because that means he's taken 3 oaths of secrecy. He's said that he will keep the secrets of the lodge and the other Master Masons in the lodge, murder and treason notwithstanding. So he can, if it's somebody tells him that they murdered somebody or but anything below that.
You actually cut out there for the whole time.
You can keep those things secret. So that's what a Master Mason has said 3 times. He's done that in every degree. He's taken an oath of obligation of secrecy. So he's proven to keep at least those level of secrets based on the general consensus of the lodge. But now,
Frater X, I'm sorry to interrupt you. You actually cut out. So basically, what was the murder part?
Well, murder and treason are 2 ways in which a Master Mason, if a Master Mason tells another Master Mason that he committed murder or treason, the Master Mason he tells is not obligated to keep that secret. He can go to the authorities and report him. That's
gotcha.
Cool.
Okay, okay.
Whereas everything else below that, he could keep the secret. It's according to the Masonic obligation, So the fact of the matter is that a third-degree Master Mason has been tested as far as the basic level of obligation to secrecy. So now he's eligible to join up to 800 different orders. That's where you get into the global power elite, as far as I'm concerned. Because
and this treason would be treason against the government, correct?
Absolutely. And so there are many, many orders that are connected to Freemasonry that you don't even know they exist until they tap you to join. I mean, there are orders out. That's why I say up to 800 orders, because nobody knows for sure. That's a speculation. I've heard 400, 600, 800. It depends on who you're talking to. But the fact of the matter is that there are hundreds of orders that still operate today that are so exclusive. They're more exclusive than the Skull and Bones. You know how we know that? Because we know the Skull and Bones exists. And these ones I'm talking about, we don't know exist. We don't know their names or their members, and you don't get to know unless you're invited to join. And so that's the level. Now, you ask the question, are the Freemasons still controlling the world, the Founding Fathers, yada, yada, yada. The bottom line here is that I believe that the Founding Fathers were all Freemasons and other things, too, that were connected to Freemasonry. And it just goes to show that that's where all the movers and shakers of the 18th century and 19th century congregated. It's within those groups, the other subgroups, the people that are involved in these other orders that you don't know about. That's where you get into the tricky, backdoor dealings that would interest people as to what they were saying and doing and how they would go forth with programs that they developed there. The basic level Blue Lodge Freemasonry, I don't think is controlling the world. These guys can barely organize, like bake sales and, public dinners for visiting night at the lodge. It's hard enough for them to get those basic things accomplished. So I find it hard to believe that the average Master Mason in a Blue Lodge would have anything to do with global dealings. But is there somebody involved in that Blue Lodge that's also maybe a member of another lodge or another order that has other members that are in fact connected to those backdoor things? Absolutely. I would guarantee it.
Do you believe there's some type of course there's a plan behind this all, but it's all interconnected. So this would be Freemasonry, the Knights Templar, which you're also a member of, and I know there's different, orders in that as well, and then also the Druids of America. What orders are you members of, Frater X?
Yeah, like you said, I'm a member of the Blue Lodge, makes me a Master Mason. I'm also a member of the York Rite, which is one of the orders that are attached to Freemasonry. The York Rite has within it the Royal Archmason, the Cryptic Mason, and then the Orders of Chivalry, which are the Order of the Illustrious Order of the Red Cross, the Order of the Knights of Malta, and the Order of the Temple, or the Knights Templar. I'm also a member of the Knight Masons, which is another whole separate order based on Irish degrees that are some of the oldest rituals that are still written down. I'm also a member of the Allied Masonic degrees. I'm a member of the Order of the Sword of Bunker Hill. I'm a member of the Builders of the Adytum. I'm a member of the Ancient Order of Druids, and also the Masonic Rosicrucians. And the Masonic Rosicrucians is an order that is an invitational body. You cannot join by application. You have to be invited. So that's one of those orders. But I knew that existed. That was actually my goal, was to be a member of that order. That was one of the reasons why I joined Freemasonry, was to become eligible for that order, because I was interested in the teachings and the spiritual practices that were encoded within the rituals and the lectures that are there. That was my goal. If anyone ever wanted to accuse me of a mercenary goal and getting involved in Freemasonry, it was so I would have access to the knowledge I sought. And I wanted to understand what was contained therein, the Western traditions, as I was becoming aware of it, and I wanted to dispel the misconceptions and learn the truth about, because I started out as a skeptic and a somebody who was terrified of the Freemasons and terrified of the whole idea of it, because I was perceiving it from a very solely negative perspective, and I had no concept of another aspect to it that might actually be, like, for example, I really believe that the orders of secrecy were these secret schools and religious orders formed through the ages, to preserve and transmit universal truths and knowledge as the ebb and flow of human consciousness shifts, for example, from dark ages to light ages and then back again. And then some of these orders are seemingly egalitarian with good intentions, while many, many others, I believe, they serve the darkness, and they serve the needs of the few over the needs of the many. But within the ones that I would call systems or vehicles of transmissions, delivery systems, the means whereby suitable individuals might be trained to awaken within their own hearts and minds higher states of awareness and existence. And I believe that is something that is not understood in the general consensus when people are looking at these esoteric orders, occult systems, or hermetic arts. They're sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater in considering all secrecy is bad, and not considering that there are aspects to the orders of secrecy that are merely methods of transmitting archetypal or symbolic knowledge, like it contained in the tarot cards, for example.
Yeah, Frater X, let's talk about that, common sense, and let's use some reason here in regards to secrecy, because when we look at that, I know there's secrets that I have between my wife and myself and my family here, and then also I own my own business where there's things that we share with, myself being the owner, and then employees in my business or subcontractors where there might be secret passwords to get access to a website, or some secret kind of marketing campaign that we're doing that we don't want to let our competitors know because it's a competitive market out there and what we do on the internet. So secrecy is something that is practiced from the family to the business to, of course, to Freemasonry, to the government. So this isn't something new, and everybody always cries against it. What are your thoughts on secrecy? Do you believe that there's some good into it and there's definitely a need for it?
Well, I think that for the individual who seeks the path towards spiritual development, he's gonna, or she will find the specific principles of secrecy that we're going to explore right now useful. And for example, okay, let's think about it like this. Think about the important role that communication plays in constructing and maintaining how we as individuals and groups experience the world, and the particular map of reality, the way of looking at the universe, of human experience, that we have. Communication, it has a potent influence on the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. How people describe things when we're little, where everything is told to us orally. We hear, things are transmitted through communication to us. And we live in the midst of an extraordinarily complex web of communication. It's not just verbal, one that expresses itself and reinforces specific ways of thinking around the world. And, the stronger and more consistent the messages of the web of communication, the more difficult it is for us as individuals to step out of it. So if we're in a group environment, we're all reinforcing the way that we understand the world and the way that we look at it, it's hard for us to take objectively, to gain perspective outside of it, and we only know the reality from within. It's like the bubble town that I spoke of and growing up in this little bubble, And so I believe that, in order for us to understand the world, we need to experience different ways of understanding it. And, if we don't, if we just stay within a routine, narrow bandwidth of perception, it creates a deadening effect, a uniformity of thought. And so the task for the seeker is to find ways to break out of the normal web of communication, at least temporarily, in order to gain perspective and insight. Methods of doing this play a role in nearly all the systems of spiritual development out there. Perhaps one of the simplest ones that we find, certainly one of the most common ones, is solitude. That's an easy way for people to understand it. If you isolate yourself from all human communication, remove yourself from it, remove yourself from its reality, its reality-defining effects, you experience a different state of reality, and you'll gain greater understanding and insights from that solitude. Human beings are social animals, and the subtle processes of verbal and nonverbal communication bind human societies together at levels that we share with our animal ancestors, levels that are rarely open to reason or even to everyday consciousness. So, it's important to transcend these. And the subtler ways to breach this web, one of them, a subtler way of breaching that web, is secrecy. If you have a secret, to have a secret is to keep an item of information outside of that everyday web of communication so that it does not become a part of the map of the world that's shared by the rest of society. So a gap forms, a gap it's opened in the web, and it's defined by the secret. Now, as long as that secret, like you spoke of, as long as it's kept, the gap remains. So if the secret's something not painful or not destructive, like, password codes or business models or all these things, this is a productive method of moving through the web of communication. Now, if the secret is something painful or destructive, a traumatic experience or repressed feelings or thoughts, or this secret, if it's imposed by force rather than freely chosen, this kind of breach in the web can cause madness, and destruction and destructive potential. But if the secret is freely chosen and freely kept, on the other hand, it becomes a tool for reshaping everyday reality, everyday awareness, one with remarkable powers and a range of constructive uses. By the simple fact of its secrecy, a secret forms a link between its keeper or keepers and the realities that the web does not include. It becomes literally a bridge to a space between worlds. And now, used in this way, secrecy is actually a method for reshaping the self, our own consciousness, a discipline that transforms the relationship between the individual and the world of experience. And this inner side of secrecy is what has made it such an important factor to Western esoteric systems, to occult teachings and hermetic arts, because we actually use this method of preparing the mind, as it were, of preparing the awareness to, like I said, it's a tool for reconfiguring awareness. So in order to perceive updates and downloads, if you will, knowledge and wisdom that's coming down from the universe, maybe, consider that's one way to think about it. I think that's a good way to think about it.
I think, solitude, getting away from this web and all these communications is very important, and that's part of, I'm big into, Gnosticism and Gnosis, and you have to look within, and you have to get away from this web and all this stuff and be by yourself and alone with your thoughts. And I've actually come to the point where I could get alone in my own head and be in a crowded room or wherever I'm at, and sometimes it's not good, but anyways, I could do it at will almost now, where I can get in those meditative states where I'm almost, in the woods, even though I'm in the house or somewhere else. So it's definitely something that I recommend that people do, to do. And as far as secrecy, that's a great way to put it, that, you take this thing outside this web, this secret or whatever you might have between you and your wife, or whether it be with the Masonic Rosicrucians or whatever secret orders that you're with. And, when I look at you, Frater X, I know you're into the esoteric stuff, and it's not like you're here to dominate the world. You're very, it seems, humble, and you're not like here to get rich or get ahead. I see that with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about Masonic Rosicrucianism? I'm not really familiar with that, and I know you can't say a lot of it. It's a secret order, obviously, but can you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, basically, the best way to look at it is that at the root of the Masonic ritual and the lodge system, I think, is this idea of the Rosicrucianism, if you want. It's a term that's kind of thrown around. I don't even know if it's technically, some say it's not even really a word, Rosicrucianism, you know what I mean? But the Rosicrucian approach to mystical approach, basically it's called a college, so it's literally the idea of a place of learning, and it's the idea of exploring. Think about when the medieval lodges, the Renaissance lodges formed during that time, say, from the Dark Ages, the Crusades time, up until the 18th century, during that before the Renaissance and then early Renaissance, it was you could be killed for discussing topics to do with the Hermetic arts or esoteric science or occult sciences or any of the teachings outside of the church. That's heresy. You could be killed. Many people were, burned and hung, and all kinds of horrible things happened to them and their families for considering things that were outside of the church teaching. So the esoteric orders that formed in those early days, the Hermetic, alchemical, and Rosicrucian orders, were places where people could safely explore these topics without fear of judgment or condemnation from their peers, because they were all sworn to secrecy, number one. They met in secrecy, and they were all interested in learning about these things. So it was a group effort, and they were committed to edifying, self-edification and edifying each other. So it was a method of so the Rosicrucian system is a system which explores things like, the tarot cards, or astrology, or the Kabbalah, or Oriental philosophies in general, like Buddhism and Taoism and Hinduism. And so basically, the Rosicrucian, and it also is overlaid with a very rich and strong Christian mysticism teaching, because a lot of the early developers of this system, which it was developed in the 19th century based on some papers that were found in the Freemasons' Hall in London, one of the archive rooms. They found some of the brothers there found some papers, and they formed three groups based on the papers they found. They formed the Rosicrucians, which they called the SRIA, or the Society of Rosicrucians in England, and they formed the Ancient Order of Druids at that time, and they also formed, which had kind of existed on and off until since the 1700s, but they really modernized this Ancient Order of Druids, which is basically an approach to the Industrial Revolution. We can talk about that a little bit, but it's a response to it almost, the Industrial Revolution. And the other group that was formed was the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And the members were all kind of crossover. It was a guy named Wynne Westcott, William Woodman, Robert Robert Wentworth Little, and then Samuel Little Mathers, or MacGregor Mathers, who people are...
The Druids, wasn't Thomas Jefferson or someone a member of them as well?
I'm not sure if Jefferson was, but I know that Winston Churchill was.
Okay.
That was later on, obviously. But Jefferson was definitely a member of some sort of esoteric orders. He was considered an Illuminist. But according from all the research I've done, he wasn't a Freemason, or he wasn't officially a member of any Freemasonic lodge in America. Some say he was a member of the Lodge of Nine Muses in Paris with Benjamin Franklin. I can't confirm or deny that, but I cannot find any lodges in America that he was actually a member of. Now, he was accused of being a member of the Illuminati during the election cycle of 1800, because that book by John Robeson had just come out, The Proofs of Conspiracy. It hadn't just come out, but it was touted. Really touted in America, because we had such a strong religious sensibility in America, Christianized sensibility, that the Bavarian Illuminati, the Germanic Illuminati, any of these outside mystical orders have always been condemned by the Church, first by the Catholic Church, and then by the Protestant churches as well, based on the belief that it is, idolatry, or in some way is at odds with church teaching or church doctrine or any of these things. Frankly, I see it more as just the fact that they find it, the Freemasonry and these kind of orders are basically a form of Protestant mysticism. So if anybody who joins these orders is engaging in a practice to gain union with the divine of their understanding, that's way too independent for any organized religious hierarchy. They just can't accept that kind of independence. Where's the priest? Where's the intercession? Where's the church? They need a hierarchy. They need a magisterium. They need a priesthood. They need all this stuff that's not there if a member is going through this. It's like a spiritual self-help program in many ways to the individual who approaches it from that, from that vantage.
Is there any kind of Catholic connection? Because you'll hear that conspiracy as well, and I've read different books that talk about that. I think the one, Rulers of Evil, was one of them, where, basically the United States from X amount of years was pretty much taken over by the Jesuits. Do you see any of that? Because I know there's Christian teachings in Freemasonry, and of course in the Knights Templar, and then you had mentioned some in the Rosicrucianism as well. Do you see that at all?
Oh yeah, I mean, you go back through history over and over again. There are different key points in the development of Freemasonry where Jesuits or Jesuit-trained individuals have their hands right in the mix. They're key points in the development of which direction it went, or how things unfolded, and you always find a Jesuit or Jesuit-trained individual right there. Right there. One of the key things was this guy named Chevalier Ramsay, and he had this Ramsay's Oration, his famous speech that I cannot prove was actually ever spoken. There are people who say it was. There are people who will say, more people I've found lately say that he never actually gave the speech, but it's attributed to him. And in this speech, he's the one who started the myth of the connection between the Freemasons lodges and the Crusader Knights. He's the one that really brought that emphasis to fruition for the postmodern, or at least not the postmodern, but the modern Freemasons, and it gave them fodder to kind of indulge that sort of romanticized fantasy about the Crusader Knights, going on horseback across the countryside, doing good deeds, rescuing damsels, fighting monsters, whatever, dragons or something, just
running from the Pope.
Yeah, running from the
right.
Pope, right, yeah, that kind of thing. But it's interesting you mentioned what about the connections to the Catholic Church? It seems like I've found evidence that you probably read some of the same books that you were just mentioning, where there's like these key Catholic officials who turn out they're secretly Freemasons at the same time, you know what I mean? And it's like, nobody knew that. And of course there's like the edicts, like the papal bulls and edicts that first they condemned Freemasonry, and then most recently they've reversed it and said, no, it's cool, they're good, we're all, everything's okay,
and Pope Benedict was an active researcher of secret societies. That was put out in Catholic press.
And then the new Pope, he's a Jesuit, right? So that's
the first Jesuit Pope.
Right. And then, like I said, there's other key people involved in the history of the development of Freemasonry in the world, but especially
the Jews as well, right?
Well, now the Jews, the Jewish faith, I mean, people love to say, oh, it's being run by the Zionist global corporate, conspiracy, and the whole protocols of the elders of Zion, and all that. And I mean, I have a copy of that. I read William Cooper's book, and I'm definitely open to the ideas that they're being presented. But it seems to me like the real thrust of that argument is merely that in Freemasonry you find the Kabbalah and the teachings of the Kabbalah, which is the form of Jewish mysticism, and was in the hands of the early medieval rabbinical priesthoods of Europe. So they're under suspect from way back from all other Christians, because it's like just an inherent knee-jerk prejudice against the Jews, and so, I mean, I'm making that statement because that's how I assess this. Now, to tell you, I have found no evidence in my research or experiences that would say that the Jews are controlling the Freemasons. If anything, I would say that it's contrary in my experience, that people of the Jewish faith are marginalized in the orders that I belong to. And you know, I mean, that's the truth of it. So it's like,
well, yeah, and if Freemasonry has a Christian base, you know, and the church has a strong emphasis on controlling the world for the past 2,000 years, that, of course, they would be more in control, and the Jews would be of the Old Testament and the old teachings. And if you don't follow Jesus Christ and the Christians, then you would be considered a Jew. That was basically how it was from day one, and then it developed more into, of course, the religion, a separate entire religion, and the State of Israel now since 1946, which, of course, a Freemason had helped put together. I don't know if you know anything about that at all.
I'm not thoroughly. I mean, could you elaborate?
Yeah, it was a Freemason president. I'm not sure which one it was, if it was the 33rd president.
Well, that was Roosevelt. Oh, no, was it Roosevelt or Truman? Truman was the 33rd president, wasn't he? Because he was also a 33rd degree Scottish Rite. So gotcha. Roosevelt was 32nd, and he was a 32nd degree, by the way, Scottish Rite, and Truman was a 33rd. So, okay. Yeah. But,
and the Scottish Rite would be more of a French connection in Freemasonry?
I like that. The French connection, yeah. No, yeah, definitely. I mean, contrary to popular belief, the Scottish Rite is not Scottish. It's more French in origin.
Regards to York Rite, you had mentioned Irish. You'd be from Irish ancestry, so that's why you would more go towards those rites?
Well, it wasn't like that intentionally to begin with. I mean, I'm also I am Scottish and Irish heritage, you know, and when I first joined the lodge system, I had every intention of joining the Scottish Rite until I realized that, first of all, it's not really Scottish, and second of all, it's not really Freemasonry. That's another big secret that people don't realize. The Scottish Rite, which tries to represent Freemasonry to the world, every time there's a Freemasonic show on that talks about the secrets of Freemasonry or whatever, it's always a Scottish Rite 33rd degree who's doing all the talking. And I've met a few of the guys that have done the talking on the History Channel. And, you know, one of the guys is a guy named S. Brent Morris, who you see all the time talking about Freemasonry. He wrote a book called The Complete Idiot's Guide to Freemasonry. I met him outside of Washington last year, and it turns out he told me right to my face that he's actually a CIA operative, that he works for the cryptography department of the CIA. That's his job. You know, this is the guy who is writing the books, the textbooks on Freemasonry, and getting up on the History Channel every time he turns around representing Freemasonry when he's really a 33rd degree Scottish Rite, and that is not Freemasonry. It's a separate order. The only connection the Scottish Rite really has to Freemasonry is one in which you have to be a Freemason to join the Scottish Rite. That's the only connection.
What's interesting to me is they have the closest house to the White House. What's the relationship there? They would have, of course, a lot of power as well in this country? Well,
yeah, because at the end of the Civil War, you know, the Scottish Rite gained a foothold in our society for several reasons. I don't think we have time to go into that right here in this hour. But the bottom line is that the reason why the House of the Temple, which is the unfinished ziggurat pyramid topped building that's right near the White House, that is the home of the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite. The reason that is because that's just showing you how much power they exerted in the mid 19th century when they built that building right there. You know, that's how much power they held sway to in America, and it's just grown from there. I mean, we'd have to do another show on. That's basically what my book's about, though, for people who want to know about how the Scottish Rite got a foothold in Freemasonry and in American society. That the Secret War Inside Freemasonry deals with that, and again, it's going to be out on SyncBook Press, which is at thesyncbook.com. Could I also take this moment to say that people should go over to freemantv.com. I know you're friends with Freeman, and
yeah, definitely.
And we're developing a really awesome new media project called Conspiracy Science Theater that's going to be launching next month, which is like a truth or variety show with various artistic, musical, and even comedic segments that are put together to basically present the media and the research topics that we discuss in a new and a really new media format that we're trying to, but it's sort of retroactive, at the same time. So it's going to be exciting, and I'm launching the Middle Chamber video series as one of the segments of Conspiracy Science Theater. So people who want to find out more about that, just keep checking freemantv.com, and also you can go to my website, which is middlechamber, the letter F, the letter X, .wordpress.com. That's middlechamberfx.wordpress.com.
So we could expect this new show in November or December?
Yeah, probably the end of November. We're still, I mean, he's got so much archive footage and material to go through, and then we're shooting new footage, and we're doing new audio. We've got computer-generated graphics and 3D animation. We've got Kathy O'Brien is going to be doing a segment. Dan Fogler is going to be doing a segment. He's an actor. There's from what I understand, Roseanne Barr from the Roseanne Show is going to be doing a segment with Kathy O'Brien, talking about satanic ritual abuse in Hollywood, as well as medical marijuana as a method of treatment, for various things. So it's going to be really exciting. And we've got other people, and we're supposed to be broadcasting with the People's Voice Network, which is David Icke's new network out of London. We're going to be simulcasting from FreemanTV.com and Anomalies television server, but also Anomalies channel television server, but also with People's Voice.
It'll be syndicated there as well.
Yeah, that's from what I understand. That's what we're doing. So it's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, that'll be great if David Icke allows that. So you won't be just cornered to creating content there, but it'll be a platform where other people could, of course, find it. Because I believe people such as yourself and Freeman should have your own platform, and people such as myself won't be cornered to just one big giant one that David Icke runs. And nothing towards him, but I like to have a little variety, and I do like following your work and Freeman as well. So I look forward to that. Audience, check it out. It's been a pleasure talking to you finally, Frater X. Until next time, brother, take care, man.
Oh, I thank you so much for having me on, and I'll be sure to come back on once the book's done.
Yeah, for sure. We'll invite you in the show in the next few months.
All right, great.
All right, take care, bud.
See you later.
Okay, bye.